known for our module manufacturing. We are the world's largest thin film module manufacturer. That's the technology that we use. Over 8,000 megawatts of our product has been installed worldwide. And in turn, we're actually a US headquartered company with manufacturing operations here in Malaysia. We're also publicly traded on the US NASDAQ stock market as FSLR. Now, although we're known for our module manufacturing, we're also into the EPC or installation part of the solar industry itself. We were originally founded back in 1999, and as I had mentioned, we had focused in on solar manufacturing. We were the first to break the $1 per watt cost barrier for module manufacturing, and we were the first manufacturer in the world to basically be able to produce 1,000 megawatts of modules per year. We've still continued on that path, which has allowed us to maintain our touch with the technology itself and keep reducing the cost of modules at the end of the day. But in turn, we also entered into EPC when we acquired a development and EPC company in the United States back in around 2007. At that time, it wasn't our intention to be an EPC, or engineering, procurement, and construction, for those of you not familiar with that terminology. But the reality was, at the time, major EPC firms in the US were not comfortable with solar itself. So we created that capability. And because of that, we started entering into the realm of project financing. So to date, we've done about $9 billion of project financing. We've also gone into the development side of the equation for solar industry itself. And that has allowed us to get a good handle on both the cost structure, as well as the challenges that a lot of installers and developers face, both in terms of installation, as well as financing. And in turn, we also monitor roughly over a gigawatt or 1,000 megawatts of plants today as part of our O&M operations. Now, our business model will differ from country to country. We don't do EPC in Southeast Asia. We actually look for strategic partners. And in turn, because of the capital cost it takes to develop an EPC capability, and in turn, a lot of the local people obviously understand the development requirements of the given country in Southeast Asia. So we'd rather partner than rather just go in by ourselves. Because at the end of the day, it is a financial product that you're creating as a developer for future investors or for yourself. So as long as you can secure that investment, people will come in, it lowers the cost of capital, and we'll touch upon that later, which ultimately lowers the cost, or the LCOE, levelized cost of electricity, for the end consumers. And that will make the utilities want to adopt solar or any other renewable solution more and more. So it's a virtuous circle at that point. And the more we make it more standardized, more safe, less risky in the eyes of the utilities and the eyes of the investors, the greater the solar adoption will be. And the lower the cost will be for the end users at the end of the day. Although we're a US-based company, we do have an international presence. What you'll see on this chart is our headquarters are in the US, in Tempe, Arizona, but we have manufacturing operations represented by the black dot in Perrysburg, Ohio, as well as our largest factory here in Malaysia, up in Kulim High-Tech Park in the state of Kedah. So what that actually makes, Malaysia is actually the home of the largest thin film module manufacturer, and is the largest exporter of thin film modules for the world, which a lot of Malaysians don't realize. And they also don't realize that Malaysia is the third largest country for module exports globally. We've done a lot of projects around the world. Just to give more background on our credentials. We recently developed a project in Japan, and we just announced that we're developing about 250 megawatts in the Japanese market underneath their feed-in tariff program, although that's going through its cycles, which totals about roughly 150 megawatts. And we're in the process of building a 102 megawatt project called Ningen, and a 48 megawatt project called Broken Hills. And then also, right now, we hold the record for the largest solar plant known as Agua Caliente at 290 megawatts AC out of Tempe, near Tempe, Arizona. The following next slides are just pictures of the plants themselves. I would be happy to talk to anybody that has a desire to know further details on how those plants are performing, or just how we went about installing them, or the technology itself. But at least this gives you a sense of the scale, what these plants look like in each one of these countries. This is the Greenhoff project in Australia at 10 megawatts. And this is what I was referring to. If we can make a safe investment, you'll get major investors like Verve, as well as GE Financial Services, to step in and buy the product. They help lower the cost of capital. And again, I'll touch upon why that's important. Because when the cost of capital gets lower, the levelized cost of electricity in your PPAs gets lower as well for the ratepayers. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, the people paying for the energy are often the ratepayers themselves, whether it's through a feed-in tariff program or through a reverse auction or PPA program. And overall, we've installed globally in the past 2 years about 1,558 megawatts of solar projects. We're ranked globally as #1 in 2013 and 2012 for solar EPC. And most of our installations have occurred in the US, as well as in Australia. And for the longest time, most of our modules were being sold into Europe and the United States. We're now transitioning more and more of a focus back into Asia, and specifically getting into Southeast Asia. So hopefully this gives you a little sense of who we are as First Solar. But now let's transition into why we're so kind of keen and excited about the Southeast Asian market. If there aren't any questions about First Solar, then I'll proceed. I like to keep this interactive, so if you have any questions, please feel free to ask them. I'm happy to answer them. Now, at a macro level at First Solar, and I think for some people, for a lot of people as well, they use this kind of filter, if you will, to understand what drives the market. For us, we detail around, is it around CO2 reduction for certain markets? Is it also a question around time of use, which is more appropriate for European and US markets? Is also a question around energy security, which is a big issue right now in Southeast Asia for certain countries. And especially in Southeast Asia, it's also conditioned upon fossil fuel savings because of volatility in natural gas prices, diesel prices for countries like Indonesia, where they use a lot of diesel engines or diesel gensets. In fact, Indonesia uses about 1,800 megawatts of diesel gensets, so they're quite reliant upon that. And also parts of the Philippines, which you'll see why we're so keen upon this industry. The other thing too is off-grid energy access. It's a niche market, but for those that can figure out the O&M puzzle, the operations and maintenance, it's a very lucrative market. So that's why we find that very interesting as well. And in turn, hybrid solutions, a combination of both diesel gensets or even with traditional fossil fuel plants like coal or natural gas. In the past, we've done it with natural gas peaker plants in the US, and we also see opportunities to do that with traditional diesel gensets or even battery solutions or other renewable solutions at the end of the day. But within Southeast Asia, again, the key drivers here are energy security, fossil fuel savings, off-grid energy access, and hybrid solutions. Now, what you'll see here is just a conglomeration of different market studies that have been done by IHS, GTM, Green Tech Media, that is, Photon Consulting, as well as our internal marketing group. We've excluded out Thailand for this analysis, and I'll touch upon that shortly. But overall, what you're seeing is that there's a huge opportunity in Southeast Asia when you look at all the ASEAN countries combined into that. A cumulative opportunity of up to 4 gigawatts of solar demand that will come through. And again, a lot of that's being driven by the need for that energy security at the end of the day, as well as a fuel price volatility hedge, if you will, and also fossil fuel savings. Now, the reason why I don't include Thailand in this is that Thailand has been the market leader so far for solar. They have just installed over 1 gigawatt of solar to date, and they're projected to install about 4 gigawatts within the same time frame. So it's a very understood and very mature market. So a lot of people are entering into the Thai market, but the opportunities aren't usually in the mature markets. The opportunities are going to be in the markets that are emerging. And that's the reason why we focus in on the other parts of Southeast Asia outside of Thailand.
What is the reason actually why Thailand has gone that far?
They were pretty aggressive because in turn, one was the policies were very favorable to promote solar in general for the feed-in tariff market as well as renewables in general. And a lot of that was driven from our understanding from their understanding that they're running out of natural gas and they're running out of fossil fuels to help power their markets. And you'll see that in a lot of other countries where natural gas is either being tapped out because they're being sold somewhere else, or just the cost of finding new pockets of natural gas. Some of you who may be in more traditional oil and gas industry have that background, know that it's not an easy thing to mine or drill for natural gas or oil within the deep ocean. There's a lot of risk, and it costs a lot of money. So in that time, you're actually seeing a need for power grow faster than sometimes the ability to meet that. A good case point that we'll touch upon later is the Philippines itself. By next year, if you speak with ADB, you speak with the World Bank, actually early in 2015, they're going to have a 300, 400 megawatt shortfall, potentially because of the lack of capacity to meet future demand. So there's a big push right now to bring in renewables. as well as diesel gensets and other solutions, just to meet the demand in Luzon itself. And as you see the fuel price volatility here, one thing to mention, as he had mentioned about subsidies, is that a lot of governments, including Malaysia, are having that hard discussion about when to take those subsidies off. Because for the common people, for me, I'm one of them, we don't want to feel that pain at the end of the day. But it does cause for the entire country a stress on the foreign reserves, because someone has to pay for that price difference for the subsidy and that real price on the open market for that fuel. Now, when we look at Southeast Asia overall, the opportunity is there. Now, the usual question is, in what segments, what areas? I can't tell you exactly which markets will move forward faster or may not move forward as quickly as possible, but at least from the market data that we're seeing, the segments that are growing quickly, you still have the traditional ground mount. That's basically the PV plant, post is in the ground, and the modules are tilted off the post. But the other opportunity that we're seeing, because of sensitivity around land and also trying to use existing building assets, is a very fast growth in the rooftop segment. Now, the rooftop segment covers both residential, which is highly atomized or fragmented, and also covers large-scale industrial, anywhere from 500 kilowatts up to, let's say, 2 to 3 megawatts. But it's growing at roughly a CAGR based upon our calculation, about 60%. Whereas rooftop, still a very large segment, is slightly slower at 6%, but there's still growth in that opportunity. Now, when we look at the opportunities here in Southeast Asia, the way we kind of rationalize the approach that we want to take depends on where we're entering into the project cycle. So if we're doing it ourselves, it's basically we're taking a financial product at the end of the day. We're trying to maximize the value in the project itself while minimizing the risk. The simplest way to think about it is that I want to try and make it into a AAA corporate bond. That's what it looks like as an annuity at the end of the day. It's a reliable, predictable set of cash flows that provide a reliable, predictable rate of return for the investors, and in turn, reliable energy source for the utilities and for the ratepayers at an affordable cost. All those three elements are tough to kind of combine together, but that's the secret that you have to go after. Because if you overcharge or inefficiently construct your power plant, it raises the cost of the PV itself, which translates into higher LCOE or PPA rates. And then people start saying PV is too expensive, you're gouging the end user at the end of the day, and then they start regulating back. Whereas if you try to push the price down by de-risking it as much as possible, and that way the cost of capital drops as well, then the PPA prices drop and it becomes more affordable and more interesting for the utilities and for everyone else to use solar and adopt it more and more. And you're seeing this trend. I think some of you can remember when solar module prices were like $10 a watt peak USD. Now they drop down below $1 in many cases. Plants become more reliable and the installers understand what they're doing. Investors feel comfortable here within the local market. A lot of international investors feel comfortable already. It's now trying to get the local money, the local investors comfortable with this PV plant. Now the other aspects are just different business models that we look at and where we want to play. I won't read you this eye chart. I apologize. I don't like eye charts at the end of the day, but it just gives you a sense of how we typically participate or focus in on. And hopefully it'll be giving you ideas of where you want to play and what's be of interest to you. Especially in parts of this world here where often the site has to be, you have to make sure that the site can actually support the PV plant. You need to know the acidity of the soil. There's a lot of details that sometimes people don't realize on how important that site is. For example, if you build anything, a house, a tower, you have to have solid foundation at the end of the day to support that plant. Even though it's simple to build and design, again, it's the details. In turn, you just got to make sure it's near a point of interconnection. What we've seen in the past is that a lot of people come up and say, I have a huge amount of land, I can build it, and then you say, where's the nearest interconnection, assuming it's an on-grid application, and they say it's 10 kilometers away. What some people don't realize is that between their project to the point of interconnection, there's a whole bunch of other people that own land. And in order for you to get your interconnection, your distribution line or transmission line into the grid, you're going to have to negotiate somewhere from hopefully just one person or maybe 100 different landowners. All of them want to make money on their land. And that can drive up your costs very quickly. One project is to take a step back for land by itself for the project. We started off at one price point, and by the time we had analyzed the land itself, it increased the cost of the project by 50%, just because they realized that there was flooding issues that had to be taken care of at that land site. So if you don't have a good piece of property or a good start, it can really damage your project moving forward. So those are one of the challenges that you have to face. And in places like Indonesia, parts of the Philippines, where title laws are not as strong, you have to make sure you have a strong partner and that you really understand who owns the land that you're actually going to build on. Next, whoop, yes?
Suppose you guys would have considered building it vertical rather than horizontal. I suppose you can't do it vertical, can you?
I mean, going building just straight up to a tower? Like, I don't think I fully understand what you mean by vertically. Do you mean just stacking one on top of the other?
It could be vertical instead of horizontal.
Ah, okay. No, we haven't done the vertical aspect because of worries around shading. Because as one stacks on top of the other, the technology, at least the way it is right now, and the traditional format of our panels and all modules, don't really lend itself towards stacking. Because as soon as you start stacking the module on top of the other, we'll start shading it or basically block out the sun. That's the only issue. But there are thoughts, good thoughts. The other challenges that you get once you get into site layouts is that you just need to make sure you comply with local electrical codes as well as local building codes. And those can be challenging for folks who are coming outside of a country. Local players understand it, but sometimes for international players such as ourselves, or even from folks going from Malaysia to Indonesia or Singapore up into Malaysia, you have to make sure you understand the local electrical code requirements, because those are small details that can catch you up and also increase your costs at the end of the day. The other thing too is just make sure that the solar plant for a lot of utilities is around integration into the grid. And so from our experience, even though you may have a wonderful project designed, you have to make sure the utility itself is satisfied. And in many cases, many power plants can provide the same regulating capabilities of a traditional power plant. Slightly different, but you can do low voltage ride-throughs, you can do frequency controls, and you can do a lot of those capabilities that sometimes people don't realize is available for solar PV plants. So for a lot of the utility folks out there, these large-scale PV plants can be designed to meet existing codes and standards for integration to the grid to maintain power quality and frequency quality. The other thing too that's unique to Southeast Asia is the heat and humidity. Many of you live it. I'm just still trying to get used to it. I've only been here for about 2 years, but I still sweat like crazy when I'm out here. But if you can imagine a module, most of the modules that you have are tested at 25 degrees Celsius. The average temperature around here is around 30 to 32. And then when you look at the actual temperature at the modules when they're functioning, it's closer towards 60 degrees Celsius. So when they have that much heat, they suffer heat degradation. And so you're not getting the full output that you'll expect if you just assume at 25 degrees. So when you model it in your financials, you have to take that into account. And also you have to take into account the humidity. There's a small thing called spectral shift that a lot of people don't realize when developing a solar PV project. But because of the water molecules in the air, because of the humidity, it actually causes the light to diffract. And because of that fact, some modules handle it better, and some modules less to that capability. So that will, again, affect your returns. But one nice thing about PV, though, and something that we always try to explain to the local users, the local council, because you have to make sure people are on board with you locally, is that we don't use as much water. I mean, you're talking about a traditional coal plant or a natural gas plant using thousands of acre-feet of water every day just to maintain their operations. Whereas at least with PV, there's actually no water to be used. And with our modules, we typically recommend you don't have to wash them at all, because there's enough rain in Southeast Asia to wash them themselves. I'm going to skip this part and just want to get into, at the end of the day, it's important to have a good O&M, because one thing a lot of people, investors, focusing on is about the CapEx. But when you look at the total lifetime cost of a project, O&M services are critical, because you want to make sure that plant is maintained and also is serviceable for the rest of its life for about 25 years. And that's about the challenges that people face also for off-grid projects. They install the system, but then the question is, how do you maintain it? Because sometimes these places are really far out. That's why it's a very lucrative market, potentially, but you have to solve that O&M puzzle. at the end of the day. The reason why that's important, as I mentioned in the report and I repeat it, is because of financing. The manufacturers, the BOS manufacturers, the installers are all doing their part to reduce the overall cost of the system. But if we don't make the system safe, don't make the actual financials around that project stable and as de-risked as much as possible, this big piece here at 36% can easily make or break your project. So again, when I say we try to make a project look like basically a AAA corporate bond, I really do mean that. So that when investors come in, whether it be private equity or hopefully more and more traditional like private investment, retirement funds that have lower cost of capital, they can feel comfortable that their money is being invested properly and they get a favorable rate of return at the lowest possible amount of risk. And when you do that, it looks really attractive from a levelized cost of electricity perspective for investors and for the end users at the end of the day.